This is everything you need to know about the Nike Tiempo Legend 10 Elite. So starting off with the upper, Nike have controversially gotten rid of the iconic kangaroo leather and replaced it with what they call flytouch plus a synthetic variation of leather. The upper also boasts these silicone-like micro dots which are supposed to enhance grip on the ball. Now over to the tongue area is pretty much similar to what we see on the Tiempo 9 in that you have this knitted mesh material in the tongue area to give you a custom fit and improve lockdown. And for the outsole, again, we didn't see many changes from the previous model. The outsole is pretty much exactly the same as we saw on the Tiempo 9, except you've got these kind of two pressure points on the outsole that you can see, but they pretty much offer nothing. And interestingly enough, in the heel area, Nike have made this change and we have this very soft foldable heel area in which it requires 0 braking time and is very comfortable. And the orange tag that you see is just pretty much to give this kind of lifestyle aesthetic to the boot. It actually offers no performance benefit whatsoever. Now for the fit of the boots. When it comes to the sizing, I'm wearing my usual 9.5 UK and I can assure you that these definitely fit true to size. However, whether or not they're good for white feet, I'm not too sure. My feet are a bit of in the middle and these kind of fit narrower than you would from a usual Tiempo boot. So I would say they are pretty much a neutral boot, but I think they're built on the narrow side. So I'd say if you have wide feet, I'd still maybe go for maybe a different option. In terms of room in the toe box, there's pretty much 0 room in your usual true to size. And as far as lockdown is concerned, yeah, it offers a very good amount of lockdown. There's absolutely no space for any heel slippage or rollover whatsoever. Now on to the comfort of the Tiempo 10. Now, like I showed you earlier, in the heel, you have this kind of foldable, very soft kind of area. And in terms of comfort, no issues there. Now the boot, for my feet, is quite snug around the midfoot, but it's nothing too uncomfortable. It still provides a decent amount of comfort. As far as braking time goes, you could pretty much wear these straight out of the box into a game if you'd like. Now the tongue area, it has this knitted mesh that kind of forms to your foot and it isn't overly tight and still provides a good level of comfort. Now the toe box I find for my feet is quite small. There is a bit of tightness to it, but it wasn't too uncomfortable. I'd still say it provides a decent amount of comfort. Now throughout the boot is quite well cushioned, it's no overly padded, so you still get a good sense of touch on the ball, and it's still to a decent level to provide you a good amount of comfort throughout the boot, especially in the kind of heel area as well. Now for the tooling, or what some people call the outsole. Now as you can see, I'm wearing the FG sole plate of the Tiempo, and in terms of the stud configuration, it's mostly comprised of conical studs with some kind of longer studs for some kind of stability, and then the one kind of chevron shaped stud in the forefoot. Now because of the conical studs, I felt maneuverability wasn't an issue in these boots. I always felt free and mobile while moving about. And the same can be said for stability. Because of the 4 longer studs in the back, I always felt stable when pivoting and then planting my foot as well. I didn't feel like I was going to slip at any time. Now in terms of responsiveness, this also is actually surprisingly quite responsive. It's not to the point that it's like a speed boot, but still quite responsive, and it does perform very well. And then the same thing can be said about the traction. This traction on this sole plate is actually quite surprisingly good. It's like, again, not to the level of a speed boot, but it almost points towards that kind of way. To be fair, over the last kind of models of the Tiempo, you could say it's more resembled a speed boot than previous years of the previous models of the Tiempo. And when it comes to stud pressure, no issues at all. I'm wearing firm ground boots on a very firm, dry grass area. And it will depend. So if you're going to wear SG on firm ground, you will feel stud pressure. But if you wear the right outsole on the right playing surface, you're not going to feel any stud pressure. Now feedback and responsiveness, I would say they're similar, but they're not the exact same thing. In terms of feedback, I'm more about the snappiness of the kind of sole plate. And in terms of the Tiempo 10, again, surprisingly, it almost as snappy as some speed boots. It's not to the level of a Mercurial or a Speed Flow, but it still performs quite well and provides a good amount of snapback and a good amount of push off while you're playing. Now feel for the ball, which some people call touch, I prefer feel for the ball. I feel touch is a bit more ambiguous, but feel for the ball is pretty much any kind of ball to boot interaction. So that's passing, shooting, dribbling, etc. And in my opinion, it's pretty much one of the most important performance aspects of any boot, as this is what kind of helps you, or this is what the brands kind of market towards you a lot of the time. As well as it actually being a preference thing, so some people like a more kind of thinner barefoot feel, some people prefer a more kind of traditional padded feel. So the Tiempo 10 is Nike's lightest and thinnest Tiempo, and offers a much more barefoot feel than previous models. The barefoot feel you experience is not going to be like that of a Mercurial, but the boot feels more like, in terms of feel for the ball, a lighter, thinner CTR 360. So it does offer a barefoot feel, but it's not to that of a speed boot, for example. But the barefoot feel that you do feel is quite good, I would say. Now, in terms of grips, the boot have these 3D micro dots on them, which I think are made from silicone. They look like they're made from silicone anyway. And they're very minimal. I wouldn't say they're very aggressive, and if they do offer any kind of grip, it's very minimal. Now, in terms of a cushion touch, even though this is the thinnest Tiempo, there is this kind of like cushion padding throughout the boot to provide a padded touch that you would get from a Tiempo or a leather boot normally. But it's not overly padded, so you still get this kind of barefoot feel, but it's like an equilibrium between a barefoot feel and a padded sensation. So yeah, it's kind of like the best of both worlds in my opinion. Now, because of the overall feel of the boots and how tightly they hug around your foot, the boot is actually very responsive in terms of the upper. There's no extra room in the boot, so when you're kicking a ball, it's almost like you're kicking it barefoot with a bit of a padded sensation. So for a boot with some padding, it is very responsive. Now, from a performance aspect, the Nike Tiempo Legend 10 does a lot of things very, very well. It's comfortable, it fits very well, it's very responsive, the lockdown is great, it ticks all the boxes pretty much. Now, from a performance aspect, the only things I would say that are maybe a downside about the boot is that it fits a bit narrower than usual and previous Tiempo models. And lastly, this one's pretty much of a personal gripe. It doesn't really have to do with performance or too much, but it has to do with the loss of identity. So this Tiempo 10, I wouldn't call it Tiempo. The change from kangaroo leather to this flytouch plush, which is synthetic, a lot of the aspects of the Tiempo model have been lost, and the identity of the boot has completely changed. This boot, like I said, it feels like a lighter CTR, and the overall build of the boot, you could say that it's just a leather-like mercurial. So it's been happening over the last few models, but like Nike have tried to like improve the boot. I say improve in quotation marks or whatever, but like it feels like the Tiempo boot has become more of a speed boot rather than a touch boot. I understand the touch style is pretty much like a boot that offers like a traditional feel with like modern touches to it, but like this feels too much like a speed boot rather than a Tiempo. And I feel like Nike have been doing that with a lot of their boots. I think the GX is pretty much an exception, and the Luna as well. But like the GT2 and the Tiempo line, I think have become like different variations of the mercurial. So the GT2 is more like a wide fitting mercurial, and the Tiempo now feels more like a leather-like mercurial. But that's just my personal gripe. In terms of the boot itself, I still think it's a fantastic boot. It just feels too different to call it a Tiempo. But at the end of the day, like I said, it's still a great boot, and it still gets my seal of approval.